This channel is for educational purposes only. Please do your own due diligence before making any investment decisions. Hi everybody, it's Joe Rabil with Invest Like a Pro, and today I'd like to talk about something a little different. I have not touched on it on the channel. I'm trying to bring in some things that haven't actually spent a whole lot of time on. While I have referenced it, I haven't actually spent a whole video on it, and I want to make sure this is pretty important to me. In fact, if I were going to write another book, I think I would probably spend a decent amount of time, maybe not the entire book on this, but a lot of time on this one specific criteria or component to what I look at. I spent years studying this, and there's a lot of different ways to look at it, but the bottom line is what I call it is compression and expansion, and understanding when you're in a compression phase and what to look for and what does it mean. So let's go ahead and get into this. And I want to start with a little graphic here because markets and stocks go through periods of compression and expansion. And the compression phases are when the swings and the price action is getting smaller and not moving as much. And you can see in terms of the crude drawing that I have here, we start out with a big swing to the upside, and then they start to reduce until the size of those swings get pretty small and work inside that triangle pattern. And then we get a breakout from that, and then we get an expansion phase, and the price action starts to move. We get bigger bars, we get bigger swings, and that's the expansion phase. Then we go back to another period of compression, and where the swings get smaller, the size of the bars get smaller, and then I show a downward expansion. And so I wanted to do that on purpose because it's not directional. You can go in either direction with this compression and expansion phase, so it's not that. And I also want to make a distinction because I have brought up the contraction and expansion phase that takes place with the DI lines and how they start to move together and then they expand again. And so that is a little bit different because that is to trend. That is where the trend is contracting. What I'm talking about here is volatility compressing. Okay, a lot of people look at volatility, historical volatility, as a way to kind of measure this. There are some other ways, but I'm just going to show you a simple way where you don't have to have any kind of a calculation or anything like that, where you can just kind of measure what's going on, see it, and it's preferable to see it in a couple different time frames, and I'm going to show you that in the example coming up. But I just want to make sure you have an idea that this is about volatility compression and volatility expansion. And we want to take advantage of this because when volatility is compressing, we want to be on the lookout for the next expansion phase. We want to get ready. This is the time you want to look at your setups, find which ones show this kind of compression pattern, and then figure out where the triggers are because you want to get involved right at the beginning of new expansion. Big moves start after a period of low volatility, and then right when you start to get rising volatility is the start of a new move. So that's what we want to be on the lookout for. Again, I'm going to show you a couple ways that I would go about doing this. So let's go ahead and get into this example now. It's Tesla. And I've got a monthly chart on the left and a weekly chart on the right. Now, I've already thrown in these triangles because I want you to see. Now, I didn't draw in the expansion phase because it's a little awkward the way you see how massive these moves are after the contraction phase. But I did want to spend a few minutes discussing each one of these contraction phases and what is unique, what is interesting. So we can start here in the bottom left, and it actually doesn't show up on the weekly chart. So let's do this. I want to make sure you can see this pretty clearly. I'm just going to expand this a little bit. It actually doesn't help very much. But what we can do is In fact, I don't really need the indicate. Well, one thing I do want to show. So let me do this first, and then I'm going to go into the whole reason for the video. So notice the move up, this last move up and pullback, and notice what was going on with the MACD. Notice how strong the ADX was. Notice the volume pattern. Look at how strong the volume was on the way up. Look at how light in comparison it was on the pullback. Okay, so we had strong ADX going up, and then we got a pullback, and then we had on the weekly chart we had strong ADX coming up, and then a pullback. And notice the zero line reversal with low ADX on this side. So we had strong ADX on this side, low ADX on that side, a MACD zero line. Yes, you draw the downtrend line in place, and that's basically your trigger. There were a few other options to get in, but that's really the entry point on this trade. Okay, so I wanted to make sure I did cover that. Now what I want to do is since I have covered that side, I want to just expand this so you can really see. And right now I do want to go over here for just a second. Okay, so I've got this compression taking place. Now, how is that defined as compression? Well, one of the things that I would recommend is be on the lookout for inside bars, especially on a monthly chart. You see how we made a move to the upside. You can't really see this, but this was sort of like an inside bar as well. We had a nice bar to the upside and then a pause bar, pretty tiny. It didn't qualify as a narrow range. Narrow range bars turn red. You can see that here. But it was a pretty small bar compared to the prior bar, and that's a sign of continuation to be on the lookout for as well. Here we had this reversal to the downside and then a move back up and strong green bar, and then we had an inside bar. This bar is contained inside this entire bar right here. Notice how the 4 line, the MA4, is holding the low of this inside bar, meaning the low of this inside bar held right at the 4 and then turned back up. So we have what I would call an inside bar with a higher close following a strong up bar. So we closed above the prior bar's high. We had a strong bar here. So this is a pause bar with internal strength because you closed to the upside. We opened down here and closed up here. These are a lot of positives. Now, this is taking place on a monthly chart. Now, it doesn't necessarily help you for the monthly, but what it tells me is when I see compression like this, it's favorable to the trend, then I'm expecting a couple of expansion bars to follow. That means I have a couple of months of expansion likely if we take out the high of this inside bar. So if I know that on a monthly chart, I've got some bias to the upside with expansion, then I want to go down to the weekly and the dailies, preferably even the daily, and see if I can't find an entry to play this to the upside. Now we get expansion. And then if you notice, we have this big bar here, and then we have a bar that's basically inside. It might have been a little above, but basically inside. And then we had another inside bar, a small inside bar right here. Okay, so if you see that, you want to be on the lookout for what's going on. So it looks like a pennant forming, right? I mean, you have back-to-back bull flags, pennants, whatever you want to call it. And in both cases, they ended with an inside bar, because that was basically the end of the consolidation. Then we started another expansion phase. So in the past, I did a video on NR7 bars. That's the red bar here. And that is incredibly important. I'll cover that in a second. But when we have an inside bar, in this case, it was a lower close, but it was clearly inside this bar, which was inside this bar, and we have this compression pattern forming. So we want to be on alert on stocks like this. Notice how the 4MA was rising. What the 4MA is the 18 on the weekly. So you want to kind of keep all this in your head, but if you see this pattern on a monthly chart, you're sort of thinking, okay, we're pulling back to the 4 is still rising. We probably have another couple months of upside and maybe an even expansion phase in volatility, not just trend, but volatility. Okay, so very important. So we've had 2 back-to-back contractions followed by expansion, another contraction followed by expansion. Now we go through another contraction phase, and notice here is an inside bar. This bar is completely contained inside this bar, Okay, so that's inside. And now this isn't quite inside, but notice this is a red bar. That means this is a narrow range. This is the narrowest range of the past 7. So I have this color coded on this Omni Broker program that I use. Now, I know when I see NR7, I want to go and look at the whole trend and see if this is telling me anything. Now, I know I've gone through a pullback phase. I already showed you the strong ADX condition. I already showed you that it was a MACD pinch. We had a lower high here and a lower high here. And now I get the narrow range bar. So now I'm thinking not only is there a bias to the upside, but we could be having an expansion phase that has some explosiveness. Usually what follows NR7s is explosive expansion. Okay, so you want to be on the lookout for that. Similar to the NR7s, the tiny NR7s are very powerful. The wider NR7s are alerts. And then, I'm sorry, not NR7s, the inside bar. So a wide range inside bar is an alert, okay? The narrow, smaller inside bars are just as powerful as an NR7. You want to be on the lookout for these, especially when they follow a good bar to the upside like that. And notice how it held the midpoint of this bar and then closed in the upper end of the range. I mean, these are really significant positives. Now, the NR7 bar by itself is telling you to be on the alert. And then you want to go and see what's taking place. And if we look at this, and now let's take a look at this in conjunction with the weekly. So now I've got this pullback. I know I've got this NR7 bar here. And let me actually do this. I want to circle this so you can see it. And let me make this a little tighter. That's close enough. Okay, so the NR7 bar actually takes place after the inside bar. But if you notice what happened during the inside bar, we had 2 narrow range bars on the weekly, right? So I'm going through this contraction phase and I get an inside bar on the monthly chart, and I know I have a zero line reversal developing, and now I've got 2 narrow range bars on the weekly chart. That's bringing me to alert. Okay, I've got an inside bar on the monthly chart. I know I have a trend line I should be watching based on both the MACD and the ADX. And if I break this trend line, there's a very good chance we're going to start to move back to the upside. So if that's the case, let me just get rid of this. We can see this more clearly. So if that's the case, I know if I break this trend line, I probably want to play it or play the subsequent any kind of pullback that follows. We had a couple of entry points. First pullback here, second one here. This was a nice pinch right at the 18. So when I look at this, I'm saying contraction, 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 and then we had expansion to follow, and what looks like expansion to follow again. So these are the types of things you want to be on the lookout for. The DI lines can help you when you're going through a contraction phase in terms of trend, but this is more related to volatility. And if you understand what volatility is telling you, I think you can get in some very explosive plays. So I love to be on the lookout for these red bars. This is the reason why when I browse, I have a black background so I can color code. And so I can go through and be on the lookout for stocks that are showing this narrow range, especially on the higher time frame. Because keep this in mind, if you get a narrow range bar on a daily chart, it's really telling you, it's more helpful for like the hourly and the 15-minute or 10-minute or whatever. It's not as helpful for the daily, really, unless you're going to trade off the daily for 2 days, because it's only going to tell you over the next 2 to 3 days, I've got expansion coming. But if you do it on the higher time frames, it can be really useful to tell you which stocks have more power, more potential in the short term to get explosive. So, hope this makes sense. I hope this is helpful. Go ahead and post any questions or comments, and we'll see you next time.